The evening air in Los Angeles carried a crisp chill, unusual for the city, but enough to send shivers through anyone without proper warmth. The streets of Hollywood Boulevard shimmered under the glow of neon signs, their reflections rippling across the damp pavement. Among the hustle and glamour of the city's entertainment hub, a small figure stood out huddled near the grand entrance of the Regent Theater, where an exclusive film premiere was in full swing. Tommy, a boy no older than 12, tightened his grip on the frayed edges of his oversized jacket. It had seen better days, much like him. Hunger gnawed at his insides, but more than that, the weight of his situation pressed down on him. He had been holding back for as long as he could, but tonight, desperation won out. The theater doors burst open, spilling laughter, conversation, and the warmth of privilege onto the street. Celebrities, dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, emerged, greeted by flashing cameras and eager fans. Tommy's heart pounded as he spotted a familiar face, Sandra Bullock, radiant in an elegant black gown, her presence commanding yet approachable. Mustering his courage, he stepped forward. "Excuse me, miss," his voice wavered, almost swallowed by the noise of the crowd. "Could you spare $1, just for some food?" His gaze stayed fixed on the pavement, shame creeping into his voice. He didn't expect much, maybe a polite refusal, or worse, being ignored altogether. What he didn't see was the quiet observer, standing just a few feet away, Keanu Reeves, watching the scene unfold with a look of quiet contemplation. Sandra paused, her eyes settling on the boy in front of her. Her security detail instinctively moved forward, but she raised a hand, halting them. Instead of reaching for her purse, she did something that left the crowd speechless. She crouched down to his level, her expensive dress pooling on the sidewalk, heedless of the damp ground. "Hey there," she said gently, offering a warm smile. "How about we talk about more than just $1?" Behind her, Keanu took a step closer, curiosity and something else, perhaps understanding, flickering in his expression. Tommy hesitated. He hadn't expected kindness, let alone attention from someone like her. Most people brushed past him, avoiding eye contact, pretending he didn't exist. Sandra's gaze, however, held nothing but concern. "How long have you been out here?" she asked, voice low enough that it felt like a private conversation despite the bustling scene around them. Tommy swallowed hard. "Just today," he lied instinctively, then sighed. 3 months, actually. But first time asking here." His voice cracked, the weight of the admission pressing down on him. Sandra exchanged a look with Keanu. He nodded almost imperceptibly, as though they'd reached an unspoken agreement. "Where's your family?" Sandra's voice was steady, patient. Tommy's fingers twisted the hem of his worn-out t-shirt. He didn't like talking about it, but something in her expression made it feel safe. She's not far, just a few blocks away. We live in our car," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. He explained, hesitantly at first, but then the words started spilling: Uthi's mother's illness, the medical bills, how they had lost their apartment, how she worked so hard, but it was never enough. Keanu took another step forward, his voice calm and steady. "You're doing this for your mom, aren't you?" Tommy nodded. A single tear slipped down his cheek, but he quickly wiped it away. Embarrassed, Keanu's expression softened. "That's brave, kid. Really brave. But maybe we can find a better way to help." Sandra stood, her posture shifting from warmth to quiet determination. "First things first," she said, pulling out her phone. "Let's call your mom. She needs to know you're safe." Tommy's eyes widened. He had expected $1, maybe 5 if he was lucky. Instead, he watched as Sandra Bullock dialed her assistant, instructing them to bring a car around. "Tell me where she is," Sandra said, placing a reassuring hand on Tommy's shoulder. "We'll pick her up, and then we're all going to sit down and figure this out together." The security team, once on high alert, now formed a protective barrier, shielding the moment from prying eyes. Keanu shrugged off his leather jacket and draped it over Tommy's small shoulders. The weight and warmth of it made Tommy's breath hitch. It had been so long since someone had done something just to make him comfortable. "Sometimes," Keanu murmured, "the universe puts the right people in the right place at the right time." Sandra smiled. "Tonight, that's us." As they waited for the car, Sandra and Keanu kept Tommy talking. They learned about his love for science, his dreams of becoming a doctor, and how he wanted to help families like his own someday. The arrival of the sleek black SUV marked the beginning of a night Tommy would never forget. As he climbed into the back seat flanked by 2 of Hollywood's biggest stars, found himself wondering if it was all a dream. But the warmth of Keanu's jacket and Sandra's reassuring smile were very, very real. The SUV glided smoothly through the city streets, its quiet interior a stark contrast to the chaos of Hollywood Boulevard. Tommy sat between Sandra and Keanu, gripping the leather seat with nervous fingers. He wasn't used to luxury, certainly not the kind that smelled like expensive upholstery, and had a driver waiting for instructions. Sandra turned to him, her expression warm yet focused. "Where's your mom right now?" Tommy hesitated. He'd never done this before trusted strangers, let alone two of the most famous people in the world. But something in Sandra's voice reassured him. "Parking lot on Wilshire," he finally said. "Near the pharmacy. She doesn't like to stay in one place too long. Says it's safer that way." Sandra nodded and relayed the address to the driver. As they neared the location, Keanu spoke for the first time in a while. "Your mom, she knows you're out here tonight?" Tommy shook his head. "I told her I was going to look for some food. I didn't say how." He fidgeted with the cuffs of his two big sleeves. "She'll be mad. She doesn't like me asking people for money." Keanu exchanged a knowing glance with Sandra. "Sounds like she's proud," he said. "Wants to do everything on her own." Tommy nodded. "Yeah, but it's getting harder." The SUV slowed as they pulled into the nearly empty lot. A lone car, a battered old Honda Civic with a dented bumper and foggy window, sat near the far end. Tommy inhaled sharply. "That's us." Sandra didn't hesitate. "Let's go meet your mom." Keanu followed closely behind as Tommy led the way. The car's interior light flickered on as they approached, and through the windshield, Tommy saw his mother, Sarah, sitting in the driver's seat, her head resting against the window. She looked exhausted. Hearing the approaching footsteps, she snapped upright, eyes instantly alert. "Tommy?" Her voice was thick with worry as she flung the door open. "Where have you been?" "I've been—" She stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening as she took in the two figures standing behind him. Sarah wasn't the type to be easily rattled, but even she couldn't hide her shock at seeing Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves standing in front of her. "Mom," Tommy started, shifting nervously. "Ill." Sandra stepped forward, her hands open in a calming gesture. "Hi, Sarah. I know this must be overwhelming, but I promise we're here to help." Sarah blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if trying to clear it. "I don't understand." Her voice wavered, and Tommy could see the tension in her shoulders. Keanu, ever the quiet presence, stepped in. "Tommy told us a little bit about what's going on. We just want to make sure you're both okay." Sarah's eyes flickered to her son, then back to the two stars. She seemed to struggle with what to say, caught between gratitude and stubborn pride. "We're managing." Tommy's heart sank. He knew that tone. It was the same one she used when she told him not to worry about skipping meals or wearing the same shoes until they fell apart. Sandra's voice was gentle but firm. "We know you've been doing everything you can, but managing isn't the same as living, is it?" Sarah swallowed hard. "I don't want charity." Keanu smiled slightly. "Good, because that's not what this is." He glanced at Tommy. "This is about making sure you both have a real chance to get back on your feet." Sarah hesitated. The weight of exhaustion, stress, and months of barely scraping by had taken their toll. She wanted to refuse. Tommy could see it in her posture, but he could also see the part of her that wanted to believe things could change. Finally, her shoulders sagged. What are you offering?" Sandra exhaled, as if relieved that Sarah was at least willing to listen. "For tonight, a warm meal and a safe place to sleep." She gestured toward the SUV. "No strings attached, just dinner and a chance to talk." Sarah hesitated again. Then, with a deep breath, she nodded. Tommy didn't realize how tense he had been until he felt the pressure in his chest loosen. For the first time in months, something other than fear filled the air. Hope. The ride to the restaurant was quiet at first. Sarah sat stiffly in the seat beside Tommy, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Every few seconds, she glanced at him, then at Sandra and Keanu, as if trying to convince herself this wasn't some elaborate dream. Tommy stole a glance at her. His mother had always been strong. Her resilience was something he admired, but tonight, she looked small. Not because she was weak, but because she was so used to carrying everything on her own. And now, for the first time in a long time, someone else was stepping in. Sandra, sensing the tension, spoke up. "Tommy tells me he loves science." Sarah turned to her son, her lips parting slightly in surprise. "Yeah," she said slowly. "He's always been like that. Even when he was little, he'd take apart radios just to see how they worked." Keanu chuckled. "Sounds like a future engineer." Tommy flushed, unused to attention like this. "Or a doctor," he mumbled. Sarah's eyes softened. "That's what he says. He wants to help people." Sandra smiled. "That's a good dream." The conversation flowed more easily after that. Sandra and Keanu had a way of making things feel normal, even when nothing about this situation was. By the time they pulled up in front of an upscale Italian restaurant, Tommy had almost forgotten his nerves. Vincenzo's was the kind of place Tommy had only ever seen in movies. The golden glow of chandeliers spilled onto the sidewalk, and the rich aroma of garlic and fresh bread filled the air. He hesitated before stepping out of the car, suddenly conscious of his worn-out sneakers and patched jeans. Sarah seemed to have the same thought. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "We don't exactly blend in." Sandra, already halfway out of the car, turned back and grinned. "Good. That means we'll stand out." Keanu winked. "Besides, I think you'll find that food tastes the same no matter what you're wearing." Tommy let out a small laugh, and with that, the tension cracked just a little more. Inside, the maitre d' recognized Sandra and Keanu instantly, his eyes widening. But before he could make a fuss, Sandra leaned in and whispered something to him. A moment later, they were being led to a private booth in the back, away from prying eyes. The moment Tommy slid onto the soft leather seat, he felt a wave of exhaustion hit him. The comfort, the warmth, the sheer normalcy of sitting at a real table again was almost too much. Sarah was more hesitant. She perched on the edge of her seat, as if afraid someone might tell them they didn't belong. Sandra must have noticed. "This is your table as much as it is ours," she said gently. "Relax. Tonight, we eat." Sarah let out a breath and nodded. Menus were handed out, but when Tommy and his mother hesitated, Keanu took charge. "All right, let's make this easy. We're getting a little bit of everything." He rattled off an order: bruschetta, arancini, pasta, and a pizza, just in case. The waiter nodded, barely concealing his excitement at serving such high-profile guests. As they waited for the food, Sarah finally asked the question that had been hanging between them since the moment they met. "Why are you doing this?" Sandra set her menu down. "Because we can." Keanu nodded. "Because sometimes people need a little help." Sarah studied them both. "But you don't even know us." Sandra leaned forward slightly. "You're right. We don't. But I know what it's like to struggle. And I know that one monotone person can change everything." Sarah swallowed hard. She looked at Tommy, then at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of her napkin. "It's just hard to accept." Keanu's voice was calm. "It shouldn't be." Just then, the food arrived. The scent alone was enough to make Tommy's stomach ache with hunger. He hesitated for only a second before reaching for a slice of pizza. Sandra grinned. "See? That's how it starts." Laughter broke through the heaviness of the moment. For the first time in months, Tommy ate until he was full. For the first time in months, Sarah let herself breathe. And for the first time in months, they felt something other than fear. They felt safe. By the time dessert arrived, an indulgent tiramisu that Tommy had never even heard of before Sarah had started to relax. The warmth of the food, the easy conversation, and the kindness of their unexpected benefactors had chipped away at her initial hesitance. Tommy, too, felt different. For months, he had been used to rationing every bite, to feeling the gnawing hunger that never quite went away. But now, he was comfortably full. It was a strange, almost overwhelming sensation. As he took another bite of the rich, creamy dessert, Keanu leaned back in his seat, watching him with an amused expression. "You like it?" Tommy nodded, his mouth too full to speak. Sandra chuckled. "Good, because we're boxing up the extras for you." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. This is a lot." Sandra gave her a reassuring smile. "It's just dinner, but if you're open to it, we'd like to do more." Sarah stiffened slightly. "What do you mean?" Keanu leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. His voice was steady, careful. "We know you don't want handouts. And this isn't about idiots, about opportunity." Sandra nodded. "The truth is, nobody gets through life alone. And sometimes you just need the right people to open a few doors." She hesitated, then reached into her purse, pulling out a small envelope. I have a friend who runs the administrative department at Memorial Hospital. They have an opening good pay, full benefits. If you're interested, it's yours." Sarah's lips parted in shock. "Wait, what?" Keanu set his own envelope on the table. "And this," he said, tapping it, "is a temporary place to stay. A hotel suite, not forever, just to get you and Tommy back on your feet. No strings, no expectations. Just a safe place to sleep while you figure out your next steps." Sarah looked between them, her fingers trembling slightly. "This is too much." Sandra tilted her head. "Is it?" Sarah let out a shaky breath. I don't know how to accept this." Keanu's voice was quiet but firm. "You don't have to do it alone anymore." Silence settled over the table. Tommy watched his mother, seeing the battle in her expression. He knew how hard this was for her. She had spent so long being strong for him, carrying everything on her shoulders. The idea of letting someone else step in, even just for a little while, must have felt impossible. Sarah blinked rapidly, then cleared her throat. I don't want to take advantage." Sandra reached across the table and gently placed a hand over Sarah's. "You're not. You're accepting help from people who want to give it. That's what kindness is." A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. Tommy held his breath. Then, finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Sandra smiled. Keanu exhaled. As if he had been holding his own breath, too. Tommy felt something shift inside him. For the first time in months, the future didn't seem so scary. For the first time in months, it felt like maybe things were going to change. The ride to the hotel was different from the ride to the restaurant. Before, Sarah had been stiff, uncertain. Now, she sat quietly beside Tommy, staring out the window, lost in thought. Tommy, meanwhile, could hardly contain his excitement. A real bed. A warm shower. No more curling up in the back seat of their old car, listening to the distant hum of traffic while trying to fall asleep. Sandra must have noticed his anticipation because she leaned over with a wink. "Wait until you see the pillows. I swear, they feel like clouds." Tommy grinned, and even Sarah let out a soft chuckle. When they pulled up to the Westwood Hotel, Tommy's eyes widened. It wasn't the biggest hotel in Los Angeles, but it was certainly bigger than anything he'd ever stayed in. The grand entrance, lined with glowing lights, made him feel like he was stepping into another world. A doorman opened the car door, and Keanu stepped out first, extending a hand to Sarah. She hesitated before accepting, letting him help her out. Inside, the lobby was warm and inviting, with plush carpets and golden chandeliers. The scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air. A woman behind the front desk smiled at them, already expecting their arrival. "Welcome, Miss Carter," she said, addressing Sarah by name. "Your suite is ready." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Suite?" Sandra nodded. "You didn't think we were going to squeeze you into a tiny room, did you?" A bellhop led them down a quiet hallway before stopping in front of a door. With a swipe of a keycard, he opened it and stepped aside. The moment they walked inside, Tommy felt like he had stepped into a dream. The suite was bigger than their old apartment. There was a living area with a soft couch and a television, a small kitchen stocked with food, and 2 separate bedrooms. The beds were neatly made, the sheets crisp and inviting. Tommy ran his fingers over the fabric of the nearest bed, unable to believe it was real. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway. This is too much." Keanu smiled. "It's just enough." Sandra walked over to Tommy and handed him a small envelope. "And this," she said, "is for you." Tommy opened it and gasped. Inside was a brand new laptop. "For school," Sandra explained. "Figured you might need one." Tommy swallowed hard. He had never owned anything this nice before. Sarah wiped at her eyes, shaking her head. "I don't know what to say." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to say anything." For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to relax. For the first time in months, Tommy didn't have to worry about where they would sleep. That night, as he curled up under the soft blankets of his new bed, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The following morning, Tommy woke up in a bed that felt too soft to be real. For a few seconds, he didn't move, afraid that if he opened his eyes, he'd find himself back in the cramped back seat of their old car. But when he finally blinked awake, the golden morning light streaming through the hotel window confirmed it. It wasn't a dream. He turned to the side, and saw his new laptop sitting on the nightstand, right where he had left it. The neatly folded clothes Sandra's assistant had brought were resting on a nearby chair. For the first time in a long time, he had options. He didn't have to wear the same thing as yesterday. Across the hall, he heard his mother stirring. He slid out of bed and padded toward the kitchen, where he found Sarah standing by the counter, staring at a fresh pot of coffee as if she wasn't quite sure it was meant for her. "Morning," he said, his voice still groggy. She turned, her expression unreadable. "Morning." Tommy hesitated, unsure of what to say. "So, this is nice, right?" Sarah exhaled a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Nice. Doesn't even cover it." She paused, rubbing her temples. "I still don't know how to process all of this. It doesn't feel real." Tommy understood. Just last night, they were worried about where they'd sleep. Now, they had a roof over their heads, food in the kitchen, and people who actually cared about them. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face shifting as she read the message. "It's Sandra," she murmured. "She set up my interview at the hospital. It's today." Tommy grinned. "You're gonna crush it." Sarah huffed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't even know if I remember how to do an interview." Tommy tilted his head. "You worked in a dental office for years. You know how to handle patients, paperwork, insurance stuff. You got this." Sarah looked at him, a mix of amusement and admiration in her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" He shrugged. "I've always been wise. You're just now noticing." She laughed, shaking her head. "All right, smart guy. Go get dressed. We're starting fresh today." For the first time in months, Sarah had somewhere to be. And for the first time in months, Tommy felt like things were finally changing. The interview. Later that morning, a black car arrived at the hotel to take Sarah to the hospital. Tommy watched from the lobby as she smoothed out the wrinkles in her borrowed blazer, nerves flickering across her face. Keanu had sent a message earlier. "You don't have to be perfect. Just be yourself. You're more than enough." Tommy knew his mom had read it about 100 times. When she finally stepped into the car, she glanced at him through the window. He gave her a thumbs up. She exhaled, nodded, and was gone. Left alone, Tommy wasn't sure what to do with himself. He wasn't used to having free time, and the idea of simply existing without worrying about money or safety felt strange. Then he remembered the laptop. Back in the suite, he powered it on, the glow of the screen illuminating his excited face. He hadn't been to school in months, hadn't even thought about homework or tests, but maybe that could change. He opened a search engine and typed "how to catch up on school after missing months." A list of resources popped up. Study guides, free online courses, tips for getting back on track. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just surviving. He was planning for a future, a new beginning. Hours passed before Sarah returned. When she walked into the suite, Tommy's heart jumped into his throat. She was smiling. She sank onto the couch, exhaling a long, relieved sigh. "I got the job." Tommy whooped, pumping his fist in the air. "I knew it." Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "They said they'd been looking for someone with experience in patient administration, and my background was exactly what they needed." She looked down, almost in disbelief. "I start Monday. Full salary. Benefits." Tommy grinned. "So, does this mean we're not going to live in a car anymore?" Sarah's expression softened. "No, baby, we're not." The weight they had been carrying for months, the uncertainty, the exhaustion, the constant fear began to lift. For the first time in a long time, they weren't just getting by. They were moving forward. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Sarah started her new job at Memorial Hospital, and for the first time in months, she had a steady paycheck. Tommy watched as the tension in her shoulders slowly faded, replaced by something he hadn't seen in a long time. Sandra and Keanu didn't just disappear after that first night. They checked in regularly, making sure Sarah and Tommy had everything they needed. They never made a big show of it, never asked for publicity or gratitude. They simply cared. One evening, about a month after their first meeting, Sarah received another call from Sandra. "We found a place for you," Sandra said. "A 2-bedroom apartment, close to the hospital and a good school for Tommy." Sarah's breath caught. "Sandra, I can't." Sandra interrupted gently. "This isn't charity, Sarah. Think of it as a bridge. The rent is reasonable, and I've covered the first 3 months so you can save up. After that, it's yours to manage." Sarah pressed a hand to her forehead, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to thank you." Sandra's voice was warm. "You don't have to. Just promise me one thing. When you're in a position to help someone else, you'll do it." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "I will, I swear." Moving day. The day they moved into their new apartment, Tommy couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't a mansion, but to him, it was perfect. His own room. A real bed. A kitchen where his mom could actually cook instead of relying on fast food. Sandra's assistant had already stocked the fridge with groceries. Keanu had arranged for some furniture, a couch, a small dining table, and even a desk for Tommy. It was simple, but it was home. As they unpacked, Sarah found an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a card from Keanu. "Sometimes the hardest part is accepting help. You did that. Now go build the life you deserve." Tucked inside was a check enough to cover their remaining medical bills. Sarah sank onto the couch, covering her mouth with her hand. Tommy sat beside her. "We're really gonna be okay, huh?" Sarah nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yeah, baby, we are." Paying it forward. 6 months later, Tommy walked into his new school with his head held high. He had caught up on his studies, thanks to his laptop and late-night study sessions. Sarah, now a supervisor at the hospital, had started a support group for families struggling with medical debt. She used her experience to help others navigate the system, offering guidance and resources. Their journey had been hard, but they had made it through. And now, they were making sure others did too. A message from two friends. One evening, Tommy came home to find a package waiting for him. Inside was a stack of medical textbooks and a note from Keanu. "Keep chasing your dream. The world needs more doctors like you." And from Sandra, "Remember, kindness is a chain. You're part of it now." Tommy placed the books on his new desk, running his fingers over the covers. One day, he was going to help people just like Sandra and Keanu had helped him. Because sometimes, all it took was one moment, one act of kindness, to change a life forever.